Hey everyone, and welcome back. Now today I wanted to talk about one of my favorite industries within crypto, and that is DePIN. For those of you who don't know what DePIN stands for, it stands for Decentralized Physical Infrastructure Network. Now this is a really interesting sector of crypto because this is a completely revolutionary industry that could not exist without the blockchain and a decentralized network. This is in my opinion akin to like Uber or Airbnb before internet or the smartphone. Uber could not exist without the smartphone or the internet, but it kind of needed both, right? And before that, like obviously taxis were a thing. Taxis existed. This was not like a new business model, but what the internet and what smartphones allowed for is for the reimagining of an entirely new industry born out of an old one. And so DePIN, I think, serves this purpose for a lot of different potential areas within the world. And so we'll get into that. And so, starting out, I figured it would be good to just do a little bit more deep dive into like what exactly DePIN is and how it impacts the world and some of the at least currently developed or like theorized use cases for it. And then we'll go kind of from there, like with what some of the top projects within the space are so far. So as we can see here, a decentralized physical infrastructure network, DePIN, provides a novel approach to developing real-world infrastructure through blockchain technology and tokenized economic incentives that leverage unused resources worldwide through open participation. DePIN projects include both physical networks, i.e. location-based resources like sensors, energy, wireless, whatever, and digital networks, i.e. computing, data storage, etc. So the rapid development of artificial intelligence is a key driver of DePINs being seen as a rising narrative in crypto. An example project at the intersection of both would be Render, which we have talked about before on the channel. Continuing on, we have DePINs offer incentives to contribute excess infrastructure capacity through native tokens. If and when the network scales up through increased participation, the native tokens are expected to gain greater value, which makes sense. Usage obviously increases value within that network. You can buy DePIN tokens, including Render Network and HELIUM in the Crypto.com app and on the exchange. So this is essentially just a plug because this is coming from Crypto.com. But ultimately, this I think provides a really good high-level introduction to what DePIN is and what some of the potential use cases could be. If we go to the CoinGecko, we can see that they have a category for actually DePIN itself. So we can see kind of the top DePIN coins by market cap. You will see some of these, we have talked about on the channel before. There are 4 I wanted to mention, 2 kind of receiving honorable mentions. So the first one I wanted to talk about was FILECOIN. After that, I wanted to talk about HELIUM. After that, I wanted to go into AKASH. And then after that, coming down here, I wanted to get into HIVEMAPPER. I also wanted to throw out 2 honorable mentions of both Render and JASMY. We'll get to those kind of, as we progress through. But Render and JASMY have both been covered on the channel before. So I wanted to kind of give a chance to kind of broaden the horizons of the overall audience with some new projects. As you guys know, JASMY is near and dear to my heart, and I do think Render is a good one as well. But AKASH is going to kind of be sitting in the place that Render could also be. So starting out, it's kind of a quick overview of FILECOIN. FILECOIN is the largest, followed very closely by Render. But FILECOIN essentially is like, think about Google Drive, but not centralized by Google. That kind of essentially is the use case for FILECOIN. You're essentially contributing extra storage space on your computer personally that people can then store their things on your computer, but it is protected and encrypted by the blockchain. So you can't necessarily see what people are storing on your computer, but it allows the essentially like the cloud effect of, instead of some massive data or server farm out somewhere that's owned, run, and controlled by Google, you now are essentially just using a whole bunch of different computers that may have extra space. Like for example, on my computer, let's say I have an extra terabyte of space for whatever reason, and I don't ever plan on using it. I could potentially, contribute that to the network and actually get paid for that terabyte of space that I have, where otherwise, like, it wouldn't necessarily be providing anybody any value. So that's kind of an interesting and novel use case. Obviously, we can see there is a product market fit. People do use Google Drive, people use Dropbox, people use a whole bunch of different like cloud storage networks and applications. So FILECOIN is not trying to like recreate the wheel, right? Like they're just trying to essentially map a new technology onto an existing product and make it better through like essentially gained efficiencies. So the next one I want to talk about was AKASH, and this again kind of pairs up with Render. Both AKASH and Render operate very similarly in the sense that they are essentially trying to provide decentralized compute. Mainly, I think this is mainly for AI, with kind of the uptick in the interest around AI, particularly decentralized AI. Having a decentralized compute network to kind of work within that does make a lot of sense. But ultimately, this is a decentralized network that can be used to do anything essentially that requires GPU, right? And same type of thing, if I'm sleeping and let's say I've got a gaming computer with a half decent graphics card in it, obviously it's not a top of the line graphics card, so it's not going to be doing any like super heavy lifting. But if I'm asleep and not using it anyway, what we could do is we could contribute it to either one or the other of these networks, and then we could get paid during the time in which we're not actually using the compute power of our graphics card. So again, this is something to kind of help bring efficiency to the world and not have a whole bunch of like essentially idle hardware that's just sitting around not doing anything. Because one thing, especially with AI, if we're to use generative like AI technology, whether it's from pictures or text or anything like that, does take a lot of compute. And so I'd heard a stat a little while ago that if we were to essentially use AI at its maximum capacity that it could be at this current point, we would need to double the amount of GPUs that we have. And as I'm sure you're aware, given kind of the NVIDIA gold rush, GPUs are currently very much at a premium. And so helping to onboard a lot of this underutilized hardware is something where that's a way where we could massively upscale the amount of hardware and infrastructure that we have available with stuff that's already essentially currently existing but not being used as effectively as it could be. The next one I want to talk about is helium. Helium, to me, I know there's probably a lot of mixed feelings, probably just given the fact that many of us have held it through the bear market, myself included. But I really do value kind of the promise of helium quite a lot, because this is something that is, to me, is very much like it speaks to kind of the Uber and the Airbnb and like that type of model, right? Like helium is not doing something new. I mean, it's actually doing something that is old, right? It's cell coverage. But currently, cell coverage really can't be provided unless you are Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, or you're a smaller company that essentially leases space from one of those three big telecom companies, because they have the infrastructure built up. And they've either done it through, essentially they were there at the beginning of cell phones being used, so people could struggle through the growing pains of that because there was nothing existing currently, or they essentially built by mergers and consolidations. But essentially the industry's become consolidated enough at this point that we actually don't have the ability to like go bootstrap a telecom company tomorrow, right? And so helium's interesting because it's very much, that's kind of how the taxi industry was too. It was very centralized, it was very consolidated, just because it was an old industry, big money was starting to play around, and it essentially rolled everything up into these massive behemoths that the little guy could not compete with because they were doing everything at such scale. So helium kind of is a solution to that in a sense, right? Because if you can essentially crowdsource a telecom network, you're doing exactly what Uber did against the taxis. So helium is one, I know people have a lot of mixed feelings about it, but I do think they are worth watching more closely, because I do see a lot of potential in potentially what they could do. And if we do find a product market fit there, I guarantee you there will be 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 other crypto companies that essentially try and copy, what helium does. JASMY's the next honorable mention because, I feel like I've covered them fairly extensively on the channel, so I didn't want to spend too much time going over them right now, just because we're all, I think, pretty comfortable with JASMY, and I do make plenty of videos. I actually am making my next video on JASMY, so we'll kind of come back to that at a later date. The next one I wanted to cover was HIVEMAPPER, and HIVEMAPPER is a little bit of an interesting one because this is essentially like a crowdsourced Google Earth in the sense, right? Because what I would do is I would pay to essentially buy one of these like cameras that I would put in my car, and then what it will do is it'll just like record the roads when I drive around, and it'll map it essentially onto like a mapping database, and then people will pay for that information when they want to use it. Again, very similar to Google Maps, but instead of needing to foot the bill of having teams across the world going and driving around all day mapping the streets everywhere, you could essentially, crowdsource it, have people drive how they're going to drive anyway, and then you just get to pay them a little bit extra for, essentially driving what they were going to drive anyway and generating that data for you. Because I mean, roads exist for a reason, right? People travel on them. And so why pay somebody to go drive them all when if you could just pay the people already driving them, probably even less than you'd be paying the people to do it as a job, right? So these are some of what I would consider some of the more exciting and projects full of potential in the industry. So overall, hopefully this video was helpful. I know the DePIN is, DePIN is a very large sector within the space, full of new and novel ideas. Obviously, some of them might work, some of them may not. I'm sure, similar to kind of the dot-com bubble early in the 2000s, I'm sure there are ideas that exist or that will exist, let's say 5 or 10 years from now, that haven't even been dreamt up so far. But I do think DePIN, and hopefully you can see why I think this, but I do think DePIN does provide a lot of opportunity for the future in terms of really revolutionizing and increasing the efficiency and just in how we live in the world, So that's something that I'm really bullish on and very happy to hopefully see come to fruition. So anyway, if you found the information in this video useful, please do like and subscribe. It really does help me out. This is still a pretty new channel, and so I am trying to hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of October. So if you could help me do that, obviously that would be very much appreciated. Also, if you do have any feedback, comments, questions, anything else like that, do leave me a comment. I do respond to all my comments, and I like hearing your guys' feedback on how things, or on how you enjoyed the videos and the content. And I also try to adapt my content if there are some requests one way or the other. So anyway, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next video.